Climate change, that's one of those environmental issues. It's fine for people who eat granola for breakfast and wear Birkenstocks year-round, but it's just not something that someone like me would care about, right? One of the greatest challenges that we face is the fact that climate change has been labeled as an environmental issue. And when we say the word environmental, people have this immediate mental image of someone who hugs trees, scolds others for not recycling, and always votes green, if they vote at all. The reality, though, is that climate change is a human issue. And last I checked, most of us are human. It's also an economic issue, a humanitarian issue, an issue of national security, and the management of our natural resources. And yes, of course it's an environmental issue too, because it affects our environment. But what is our environment? It's our home, planet Earth, the only home we have. The other summer, I was speaking at a science festival in Norway, where I had the honor of watching Stephen Hawking give one of his final talks. As you may know, he was outspoken about the dangers that climate change poses to human civilization as we know it. But in speaking of those dangers, he said something that shocked me profoundly. To escape from climate change, he said, we may have to terraform Mars. What? I thought, as I nearly leaped out of my chair. There's no way. If we don't fix climate change now, the impacts on human society will be so widespread and so devastating that we'll be incapable of terraforming Mars, let alone populating it with any significant number of people. So the next day, when I was waiting backstage before my own talk, I found myself in the company of Lord Martin Rees, who is the Royal Astronomer of England. He is also a longtime friend and colleague of Hawking's. So I took the opportunity to ask him, do you agree with what Hawking said? I will never forget his answer. Oh no, he replied, shaking his head. Fixing climate change is a dawdle in the park compared to terraforming Mars. I know people who are excited about going to Mars, and I wish them well. But space exploration will not solve the problem of climate change. That's because the planet that we already have is our perfect home. We don't often think about the fact that every resource we have and use comes from the Earth. How long would we last without air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat? And that's not all. The materials we use to build our homes and our infrastructure, to make the clothes and the goods we use, including the phone or the computer or even the TV that you're using right now to watch this video, every piece of that came from the resources provided by our planet. That's why, to care about a changing climate, we don't have to be someone who considers themselves an environmentalist, although it certainly helps. We just have to be a human who wants this planet, the only one we currently have and are likely to have for a very long time, to continue to be a safe home for us all. And it isn't about moving climate change up our priority lists, as if it's currently at number 21 and we need to move it up to 8 or maybe even 3. No, I don't think climate change needs to be on our priority list at all. The only reason we care about it is because it already affects everything else that matters to us today. Just think about it. There are more than 7.5 billion of us on this planet, and we have built our cities and our countries and our socioeconomic systems on the assumption that climate is stable and that the conditions that we've experienced in the past paint an accurate picture of the future. Today, though, that assumption is no longer true. The Earth's climate is changing faster than any time in the history of human civilization. Why does that matter? If we value the places where we live, which for hundreds of millions of us are in areas that are already at risk due to sea level rise or stronger storms or both, if we care about climate change because it impacts the food we eat, where we grow it, how much it costs, the air we breathe and how clean or dirty it is, the economy, national security, humanitarian issues like hunger and poverty and disease across the world. In short, climate change will directly impact the future of civilization as we know it. If we care about any of those things, then we are already the perfect person to care about a changing climate. Now, it's true. There are some values that are incompatible with fixing climate change. But those values are ones that put short-sightedness and greed front and center. If all we care about is our comfortable life today, or how much money we could make this year from digging up or burning fossil fuels, no matter what harm it does or what impact it has, then sure, we would not care much about climate change yet. It just doesn't make sense. But if you're a human here on Earth and you care about your family and their future, you already care about climate change. You just might not have realized it until now. By connecting the dots between what we value, what we hold dear, or even what we like to do in our spare time, whether it's skiing or birding or hunting or fishing, and how climate change will impact those things going forward, that's what gives us a genuine motivation to care, to do our part, and to hold our elected officials and our politicians and our leaders responsible to do their part too, to curb our carbon emissions before it's too late. Thanks for watching Global Weirding. This episode was brought to you in part by Citizens Climate Lobby. If you have any questions about climate versus weather, let us know during one of our Facebook Live Q&As. And please be sure to check out globalweirdingseries.com for more episodes. See you next time.
One thing that she talked about is the fragile state of the Earth. This is a famous picture in the background there of Apollo 8 in 1968 when they took the photo. The first photo, and they called it Moonrise or Earthrise. Now, one thing that I want you to pay attention to is how thin the atmosphere is. The atmosphere is thinner than the skin of an apple relative to the size of an apple. So think about that. And yet, we all breathe it. So she talked about climate change, and over to the left we have since Christ, since the time that Christ walked on the earth, what carbon and various the temperature anomalies, and over here we have 12,000, the most recent 12,000 years. Oh, sorry. So 12,000 years just happens to correspond with how long humans have had agriculture. Now that's an amazing history of stable temperatures for 12,000 years. And this is what the last several years look like. And you notice, people talk about centigrade or 1 degree. Well, what's going on here? The difference is this is in Fahrenheit, which is what we're more used to commonly. So it's gone up 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit is about 1 degree centigrade. Now, Munich Re keeps track of the number of natural loss events, and this shows the last 36 years to 2016. And one thing you notice about them is the number are increasing, as opposed to the number of meteorologic, hydrologic, and climatologic events are increasing, while the geophysical events are staying stable. Geophysical events are like earthquakes and so on, which are much less correlated to climate change and temperature, much less sensitive. So, is every storm caused by climate change? No, it's not. All weather events are affected by climate change because the environment in which they occur is warmer and moister than it used to be. But as far as attributing particular events we can't do that quite yet. And here, this is a human, a footprint in terms of carbon footprint. We'd need 4 Earths to sustain our lifestyle if everybody on Earth lived as we do. And everybody wants to live a good lifestyle. I mean, that's natural. But we've got to use fewer resources is the point that I'm making here. We can live a good lifestyle without using quite as many resources. And this solar system, the solar panel system, or the solar array, there's 144 solar panels on the roof of this building, thanks to this gentleman over here from Shine Solar. And that's not, well, we'll get into, it's not a complete answer. Okay, it's a partial answer. It's a helpful step, but it's not complete in reducing our resource consumption. Now, resources have multiple effects. One aspect of resources is called, the source, where they come from. But there's also the sink issue. And the sink is that apple skin, thin air that we breathe. Now, the crust of the Earth is about the same thickness as the atmosphere. So, when you've gone on an airplane and the pilot talks about we're now cruising at 30,000 feet or 35,000 feet, that's about what we're talking about. The crust is the source of all of our of modern life, and the problem here. But one thing, a solid is 1,000 times as dense as a gas, as air. So the air is a much more vulnerable aspect of our Earth than the solid part. Okay, so we've got 3 responses: mitigation, adaptation, or misery. And we're going to determine how much misery there is and who gets miserable, unless we choose mitigation and adaptation. Adaptation is a personal protection measure. Mitigation is a prevention issue. And these are the kind of people who are the most vulnerable to the misery aspect. And this is in Central America, and it's very common in Central America, all around. Now, what are the causes? What are the sources of the carbon? It's mostly energy. 84% of it's related to energy, either electric power, transportation. In the U.S., notice the U.S. greenhouse gas bisector. And we in Arkansas are getting worse, not better. Here we show that transportation has crossed over the electric power generation grid in terms of carbon dioxide production. And here we see that there's a carbon dioxide equivalency issue. Carbon dioxide is 77% of the problem, but we have methane, nitrous oxide, and these CFCs, HCFCs. Now, this is just in terms of how much the current issue is. Mac is going to be talking to us soon during the day, that there's a huge sink out there. There's a huge source of refrigerants, because that's what we're talking about here is refrigerants. And so he'll tell us in detail what the problem is with that. But as far as what's currently leaking on an annual basis, it's small, but the potential is huge. Now this is just to remind us that there's ranges of things, and there's probabilities, and so when people talk about, you know, the middle, you always have to think of error bars. And here, this is the warming trend in Arizona. This is a drought index. So even if the minimum predicted increase takes place, it will be larger than any change over the past 10,000 years, or more. In fact, it's more like 1 million years since there was a change as sudden as what we're contemplating or causing. And already we're seeing deaths directly from climate change, and they're mostly concentrated in Africa. So, we don't have to worry about it, right? And here's the hunger map. And this shows the latency issue. What's this 0.9 out of 341 being sourced from incoming solar radiation? The 0.9 is what's out of whack. So it's just a small fraction of what the sun's providing, but it ends up causing a problem because of an effect that Catherine Hayhoe was talking about in the. Now this is right here in Fayetteville, and this is the kind of problem. There's homes and apartment buildings all in this flood area. That wasn't a flood area when they were built. They wouldn't have been allowed to exist there if it had been. So it's not just people in Africa. It's here right now, and there's exotic species that are moving into our area. Just this morning I was reading about a kissing bug, you know, a bug that bites people near the lips. So there's all kinds of pathogens that are better off coming into an area like what we're becoming rather than what we were. Fire ants is another one. Fire ants in Fort Smith, that's an exotic invasive species. And this is one place that I found fire ants, but it's also a place that where Steph and Pollard and I were instrumental in getting these solar panels put on this particular church in Fort Smith. And as a result, they've produced quite a bit of energy over time. And actually more recently, it's actually over 100 megawatt hours. This is here in Fayetteville at the Omni Center. And as usual in Fayetteville, when we put up something like this, we want to have a party and have some singing, right? And this is here at Good Shepherd. The prediction of what the potential was before we put the solar panels on. The cost ended up being $1.36 per watt, which is utility expense. You know, that part of my point is that costs have come down so much. Source of panels and the organization of companies like Shine Solar is so tightly done that we have the potential to reduce costs greatly. And here's a photograph taken by Doug Hutchings of what the solar panels look like from a drone. I think it's beautiful. One of my former students said he almost drove off the road when he saw it because it was so beautiful. And again, this is the prediction. But this is the reality. In less than a year, we've had 89 megawatt hours generated. That's, you multiply that by about $90 is roughly the value of each megawatt hour. So it's quite valuable. And just the calculated number was $5,500. And that was before the 89 megawatt hours. That was back when it was still only 59 megawatt hours. So here we see the tendency to overproduce, or the tendency to overgrow, is tremendous. So the black line at the bottom is what the prediction was back in this year. And each year, the EIA, the International Energy Agency, has predicted little growth. But the reality is the gray line. It's really taking off. And Mr. Gordon's in the right business. So with that, I've got a bunch of other things I could show you, but we're behind. So Caleb, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Caleb Gorden. I am one of the co-founders at Shine Solar. Maybe some of you have heard of us. We're out of Bentonville. We're primarily a residential solar installer. We've done a handful of commercial jobs, but this is one of the larger ones we've done. We did one recently on a big veterinary supply distributor out in Taneytown, 350 panel system out there. But the bread and butter of our business is the residential market. Shine got going back in early 2016, so we're about 3 years in. But he made the comment that one of his students said they almost ran off the road when they saw this. When we started Shine Solar, we were trying to just be creative and think, what's the tagline here? What are we about? And what we came up with after much thought was installing happiness. That's what we do. We install happiness. And where that came from is most of the things that you have to spend money on for your home are they're just not fun expenses, right? When you have to replace a roof, when you have to, any home repair that you have to do, you have to do it. It's not fun. You got to swap out your HVAC unit or put in new windows. You'd rather spend your money on other things. But there's something about solar panels that when you put solar on your roof, it genuinely makes you happy for years to come when you pull into your driveway and you see your solar panels on your roof. There's a feeling of contribution that you're doing your part, and it's a home expense that's actually saving you money in the long term. And that's the general feedback we get from most of our customers is they're happy when they have solar panels. They're excited about it, and it's not just an emotional purchase on the front end like a new car, and after you've had that car for 3 months, it's like, shoot, it's actually just another car. It's a good feeling. And so we have a lot of fun doing what we're doing because it is fun to see the light bulb go off in customers' minds when they realize, hey, this actually makes sense. I'm gonna set this up on a couple chairs here. I just want to see this. I'll hold it back over here. So I'm just going to draw kind of your traditional bell curve. A lot of times we see the bell curve in an academic setting related to you've got your handful of students that get the all A's, you've got your handful that fail, and you've got a lot in the middle that, you know, your D's, your C's, your B's, right? Your averages. This is much like technology in so many ways, but specifically with solar. I want you to think back throughout your life as technologies have changed, and the adoption rate that you saw with that. So for example, one of the most recent ones is cell phones, right? Very early stages of cell phones that came out. Some people grabbed it quick. A lot of times on the very front end, it's people with money, right? The wealthy get involved much sooner, people that can take a little bit more risk, or just the gurus. And what happens is, as that technology advances, costs typically come down. People tend to understand it. The education rate increases, and it becomes more and more viable for more people to get on. You've got the peak here, where the bulk of people say, "All right, I'm in on that. I'm going to get a cell phone now. I grasp it. It makes sense." And then you got the people that resist it for a while, right? That say, "I'm never doing that. I'm going to keep my home phone, and it's what I've always done, and it's what I'm always going to do, and this is just easiest for me."
I call myself a surly adopter.
Yeah.
I'm surly.
And then you got the people at the very end, right? There are a handful of people that I talk to that still do not have an email address. I don't get it, but they've managed to just continue life the way they've always done it. And they're way over here on this end, right? So solar has played the same role. The concept of solar panels is not new. It's Ben Franklin figured out how to capture the sun and convert it to energy. What's happened is the technology's advanced, right? And it's become affordable, but probably starting in the you might know better than me, but I'm looking at like the scaling of the business side of it. Mid-2000s, there were some tax credits announced to kind of help spur it along, and we saw some early adopters. And a lot of the early adopters on solar panels, even pre-2000s, were just people with money. They could write a check. That was really your first way, was just to pay for it outright. And they did it. Handful did it. And maybe some of you know some of them, but a lot of us have not seen many solar panels. Well, what happened was, they said, the business side came out and said, how can we get creative? How can we make solar more available to more individuals? And what we saw on the east and the west coast, and it started in these markets because the cost of power in these markets is so much higher than it is here. Here we're paying 9, 10, 11 cents a kilowatt hour, where in California they're paying upwards of 40 cents a kilowatt hour sometimes. So if your house uses the same amount of power as that house in California, their bill is 4 times the amount yours is for the same amount of power. And so they came out with a leasing model where they said, hey, we're going to come out, we're going to put panels on your roof. You don't pay anything out of pocket. Every month, instead of paying the electric company, you're going to make a lease payment. I own the panels. I'll keep them, and in 20 years, your lease expires, and we can come take them, or you can renew it if you want to. But essentially, all they were doing was trading a variable cost every month for a fixed monthly lease payment on the solar panels, and the business that owned the solar panels got to absorb all the tax credits. So this was kind of the first thing where it was available for multiple people. Hey, if you had a decent credit score and you paid your bills and you were a homeowner, you could get into a lease and get solar panels, and the cost every month for power was cheaper than the alternative of just staying with the utility. That didn't work in this area because on a 40-cent kilowatt hour bill, they could do a lease for 20 cents, cut the person's bill in half, and they were happy. But here, they couldn't get the price that low. The cost of equipment was still too high. That's why you haven't seen much adoption in solar in Northwest Arkansas and in the Midwest for a while. Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, we saw solar loans come into play. Where now it was, don't lease it anymore. Why would you lease it? Just get a loan and own it yourself. Same concept, right? Buy the panels. They have a 25-year warranty. Replace your monthly electric bill for a solar loan payment. Every month as you make that payment, you're building equity in something. You own it. It's no different than renting a house or getting a mortgage. You're going to pay about the same every month. One's buying you something, one's renting you something. It's a no-brainer, right? And people start to realize, hey, well, yeah, why would I let that leasing company take advantage of the tax credits or whatever it is? And so we saw this adoption of solar ownership come into play. Great model. The problem was it still didn't appease to the nonprofits. It didn't appease to churches, to governments, to schools, to municipalities, to all those things, because those things don't pay taxes, right? And so the biggest advantage of the leasing model is that we can go to businesses all over, and that whether they have tax liability or not, we have an option now. And that's what we're starting to see. Some of you have heard about Senate Bill 145 that just recently passed in the state of Arkansas. And what it did is it opened the door for third-party ownership in the state of Arkansas. So now leasing is available in the state of Arkansas. While that doesn't change the model on the residential side a whole lot, it's still better to own it if you can own it. But for things like churches now, like we have here for school districts and municipalities and large-scale commercial projects for entities that don't have a tax liability, now the door has been opened in the state of Arkansas for leasing to be allowed. And so that's a big step for solar in this state and to move in the right direction. And so kind of back to my bell curve here, I think, California, what you have is you have super high utility rates, but every single house pretty much has a 5 kilowatt system, and the weather's about the same year round. Here we have low utility rates, but our average system sizes are 10 and 12 kilowatt. They're double what they are in California, and the extremes in weather are extreme all year long. Your winters are extreme, your summers are extreme, and so the weather trends are much different. So there's trade-offs, right? Rates, while rates are cheaper here, we have other headwinds. And so what's happening is I think on your east and your west coast, where solar's been available now for 10 plus years at a massive scale, you're going through neighborhoods in Arizona and in Southern California where 1 out of 4 houses has solar on it. And they're somewhere over here, right? We are still very much in this area in the state of Arkansas. It hasn't taken off yet. It's going, but yeah.
5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. It's going. But there's just a huge education component about it, which I would argue most of you are further along on that than others. But the idea here is, for the first time in our lives, there's a new way to consume electricity that's never been around. We see disruptions in all sorts of markets. You see what things like Uber have done to the taxi industry in big cities. You see what cell phones did to the telephone industry. Same type of thing, right? What happens is, if you're waiting, I show the bell curve to show that if you're waiting for technology to improve before you adopt solar, you will always be waiting, because it's never going to stop. If you're waiting for the newest, sleekest, nicest flat screen TV, keep waiting, because it's going to keep getting better. They're going to keep getting cheaper, and they're going to keep getting better. But if you still haven't adopted a flat screen TV, if you still have the big box one, you've missed out on years and years and years of quality TV watching, right? Because you're waiting for something better or cheaper. And so it's kind of the same thing with solar. Is it likely that solar costs will continue to decrease? Sure, it is. Is it likely that they'll be able to increase the efficiency of a panel, and that one panel will generate more power in 3 years than it does now? Absolutely. But what you're missing out on is the benefits right now while you wait. And so, like I said, it's no different than renting a home or owning a home. The whole reason you go out and you get a mortgage is because the mindset is, well, I don't have to be here 30 years for a mortgage to make sense. If I sell my house in 5 or 7 years, I get back part of what I put into it. I recoup what I put into it. And that's the whole mindset. That's the idea. So, same thing with solar. We're limited on time, but I just want to talk for a minute about just the technology side, the economic benefits, and that for the first time in our lives, there's a way for everybody to have solar panels. And that's what I'm working on. That's what Brother Orlo Stitt's working on over at Stitt Energy, and trying to get the education out and get as many people into it as we can. But my counsel would be, don't wait, because you'll always be waiting. Start taking the savings and the benefits now, along with the footprint that you're leaving behind, right? You can begin to change that now, and it's affordable. It makes financial sense more than it ever has. And I'll leave it at that. We're out of time, unless there's any questions.
Yeah, where are we with tax credits for individuals?
Yeah, residential tax credits is still a 30% federal tax credit. So if you buy a $20,000 system, you've got a $6,000 federal tax credit.
For another couple of years, right?
For how long?
It's 30% through the end of this year. And then it drops to 26% for all of next year. 22% for all of 2021, and then it's gone. Yes.
Where are we with net metering, with the SB 145?
Yeah. So that took a little bit of a hit.
And there's another session that's going to talk for
Okay, that's what I was going to say.
There's a policy session later today.
Okay, yeah. It took a little bit of a hit. It's not a deal killer at all. We just have to be very mindful when we size the system that we're not overproducing more power than what you're going to consume, because if you do overproduce, you're not going to get the same buyback rate as what they sell it to you for. And so that becomes very important on the design side of the system. But totally new.
Okay, we should probably let the next speaker get going. I'm sorry, Caleb.
No.
But Caleb, when you're out, and questions if you like. Thank you.
So the next session is going to start in about 5 minutes. So restrooms are down this hall. If you're moving rooms, take some coffee or juice with you, and we'll get started in just a little bit.